Daniel had never been away from her for this long. 4 months felt like 4 years. Every day in the war zone blurred into the next, sand and sweat mixing with the ache of distance. His thoughts often drifted to her, to their last morning, together, to the way she stood by the window brushing her hair, unaware of how much he would carry that image into battle. When the mission finally ended, he didn't call. He didn't message. He booked a flight and came home unannounced. He wanted to see her face before she had time to put on a reaction. He wanted real emotion, unrehearsed. The taxi dropped him off at their apartment just after sunrise. The street was quiet, almost frozen in time. He climbed the familiar stairs, heart pounding, his hand shaking slightly as it reached for the doorbell. He imagined her gasp, imagined her throwing herself into his arms. It was supposed to be the kind of reunion they make movies about. He rang the bell. Silence. Then soft footsteps. His stomach turned. The door clicked open, and there she was. Older, somehow. Her face marked by something he couldn't name. Her eyes didn't fill with tears. Her lips didn't part in joy. She froze, and then Daniel saw it. The shadow moving behind her. A man. Not touching her. Just present. The air thickened. He blinked twice, trying to reset his mind, to find a version of reality that made sense. But all he could feel was the weight of something slipping away. Something he thought he was returning to. The war was supposed to be over. But the real battle, he suddenly realized, was right in front of him. And he didn't know the rules anymore. For a moment, nobody said anything. The hallway felt like a vacuum, silent, thick, and unforgiving. Daniel's eyes were fixed on her, silently begging for an explanation, even as his pride screamed for him to walk away. But his legs wouldn't move. Her name nearly slipped from his lips, but he swallowed it back. The man behind her stayed still, respectful in posture, as if he too understood the weight of what was unfolding. She finally opened the door wider. "You should come in," she said quietly, not reaching for him, not smiling, just inviting him into something unfamiliar. The living room looked the same, but everything felt different. As he stepped inside, Daniel noticed subtle changes. A different painting on the wall, new throw pillows on the couch, shoes at the door that didn't belong to him. His chest tightened. She offered him water. He refused. She didn't force it. Instead, she sat, legs crossed, her hands restless. "I didn't think you'd come back like this," she began, her voice trembling but honest. "I didn't think you'd want to see me." Daniel's eyebrows furrowed. The words felt out of place, as if he had missed a chapter in a story he thought he knew by heart. "What do you mean?" he asked, more wounded than angry. She looked at him then. Really looked. "I wrote to you," she said, "for months, but I never got a reply." His breath caught. "I never received anything." She nodded, almost as if she expected it. "They told me soldiers sometimes get cut off, that the letters can be lost. But after a while, I started to wonder if you had stopped caring." And just like that, the ground beneath him began to shift. Maybe, just maybe, she had been surviving her own kind of war. Daniel stood still in the middle of the living room, surrounded by memories that no longer felt like his. The photo on the shelf of their wedding day, once a symbol of forever, now stared back like a ghost of something that had died quietly. Her confession about the letters cut deeper than he expected. He had clung to the belief that she had simply moved on without him. It was easier to feel anger than to feel abandoned by fate. But now there was a new enemy: doubt. If she had written and he never received those letters, if she waited and began to believe she'd been forgotten, then maybe neither of them were truly to blame. He looked at her again, noticing how tired she seemed, how her strength was wrapped in layers of pain he hadn't seen before. "So," he said slowly, carefully, "is that why he's here?" She glanced at the hallway where the man had silently disappeared. Her voice broke. "He's not who you think. He's not replacing you. I met him after the 3rd month of silence, when I thought I'd lost you for good." Her fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of the couch. "I didn't want to love anyone else. I just needed someone to talk to, someone who could understand the silence." Daniel sat down, unsure if his knees gave in or his heart did. The betrayal he felt had morphed into something more complex, something harder to name. It wasn't rage, it wasn't grief. It was the realization that she had been fighting too, that maybe he wasn't the only one broken by the war, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had the right to be angry anymore. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The bed he once called his felt too big and too hollow. He lay on his side, staring at the ceiling, listening to the subtle creaks of the house, the same ones he used to know by heart. But now they felt foreign, like the rhythm of a song he had forgotten how to hum. His thoughts were louder than any sound. The echo of her words, the tremor in her hands, the way she said she waited, and broke. He had imagined this homecoming 1,000 times, in the trenches. Every time it ended with her running into his arms, with tears of relief and joy, not this quiet ache and moral confusion. He tried to picture her life during his absence. Each morning she woke alone, every letter she wrote that never reached him, every unanswered silence that must have chipped away at her hope. Maybe he hadn't been forgotten. Maybe he had disappeared, too completely. A soldier in a war, unreachable, untouchable, slowly becoming a memory too painful to keep alive. He wondered if he would have done the same had the roles been reversed. The question haunted him more than her confession. What is loyalty when hope runs out? What is love when silence lasts too long? The weight of the answers pressed against his chest like a rifle he could no longer carry. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to escape, only to see her face again, not the one that greeted him today, but the one he remembered. Young, bright-eyed, full of belief in them. Now she was older, not in years, but in sorrow. And so was he. Maybe the real war hadn't started when he left. Maybe it was just beginning now. At sunrise, Daniel found himself in the kitchen, holding the same mug he used to drink from before the war. Its edges slightly chipped, the handle worn smooth. The smell of coffee brewing didn't comfort him like it once did. Everything was familiar but distant, like waking up in a replica of his old life where all the pieces were in place. Yet none of them belonged to him anymore. Laura walked in silently, barefoot, wrapped in a robe, her eyes puffy but dry. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching him. And then, almost in a whisper, she said, "I thought I lost you. For good." Her voice cracked halfway, through the sentence. Daniel didn't answer right away. He was trying to figure out whether she meant she lost him to death, or to time, or maybe to something deeper, the version of him that couldn't come back. "I came back for you," he finally said. "But maybe you weren't here anymore." Her face tightened. She sat at the table, clasping her hands together, trying to explain something she hadn't found the words for. "I waited, for months, for years, but grief plays tricks on people. I didn't want to stop loving you, Daniel. I just needed something to remind me I was still alive." The silence between them wasn't loud. It was devastating. He realized then that she hadn't betrayed him in the way he feared. She had fought her own war, quietly, invisibly inside this house, while everyone around her said to move on. Daniel looked at her, not with anger, but with an ache he couldn't name. He hadn't been the only one who'd gone missing. She had disappeared too, in her own way, and maybe neither of them had really come home yet. Daniel stood there, motionless, watching the steam curl up from his untouched coffee. The words Laura had spoken didn't hit like a single blow. They seeped in slowly, dissolving the clarity of his pain. He had returned ready to confront a betrayal, to hold on to righteous. Heartbreak like a soldier clinging to his scars. But this was something murkier. It wasn't infidelity in the dramatic, cinematic sense he had rehearsed in his mind during long nights at war. It was survival. Emotional survival. And now, standing face to face with it, Daniel felt something strange. Not rage, but a kind of guilt. He had imagined her frozen in time, waiting by the window, untouched by loneliness or confusion. But she had lived each day, carried the weight of uncertainty, grieved a man she couldn't bury and couldn't contact. In his silence, she had built her own, a fortress made not of betrayal, but of fear, confusion, and human need. "Did you love him?" Daniel asked, his voice barely audible, as if fearing the answer. Laura looked down, her fingers trembling, slightly. "I loved you," she said, "but he saw me when I forgot how to be seen." That answer, honest and raw, unraveled something inside him. It wasn't the presence of another man that hurt him most. It was realizing how long Laura had been invisible, even before he left. Maybe the war hadn't stolen his marriage. Maybe distance had crept in long before deployment, disguised as routine, silence, and the assumption that love required no tending. Daniel realized then, he wasn't just grieving the woman in front of him. He was grieving the man he had been before the uniform, before the letters stopped coming, before everything became survival, and neither of them could go back. That night, Daniel lay on the couch, fully clothed, eyes wide open, staring at the dark ceiling. The house, once filled with dreams and echoes of laughter, now felt like a foreign land, one where every object whispered of what used to be, a picture frame tilted on the shelf, the smell of her shampoo lingering in the hallway, the creak of the floorboard near the kitchen. All of it felt both familiar and unreachable. Laura slept upstairs, or at least pretended to. Neither of them had the courage to speak again. Not yet. Daniel tried to retrace the moment things changed. Not tonight, but years ago. The missed calls, the short letters, the way her handwriting had grown colder with each envelope. Had he stopped being a husband before he even left? The thought ached more than any battlefield wound. He'd fought for something he didn't know was already slipping through his fingers. He had imagined this home as a lighthouse, unwavering, untouched. But now he saw it differently. Not ruined, but transformed. As if the storm had hit long ago, and tonight was only the day he opened the door to see what was left. In that silence, a deeper question grew inside him. What if he was never meant to return as the same man? Because the man who left had already disappeared long before the war began. Maybe this version of him, the broken soldier seeking absolution in confrontation, wasn't here to fix what was lost. Maybe he was here to understand it, accept it, and find out if something new could grow from the ashes. The hardest battles, he realized, weren't fought with weapons. They were fought in rooms filled with memory, regret, and someone waiting. Upstairs, still hoping for truth. When morning arrived, Daniel didn't need an alarm to wake him. His guilt had done the job hours before. The coffee brewed slowly in the silence, filling the air with warmth that clashed with the cold stillness between them. Laura stepped into the kitchen without a word, her presence gentle but full of weight. She didn't wear anger like he expected. No screaming, no shattered plates. Just quiet eyes, red from a night of tears, and a silence that spoke more than any fight could. She sat across from him at the small kitchen table, the one where they once talked about baby names and vacation plans. He couldn't look at her directly. It felt like facing the ghost of someone he loved, and maybe still did. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Her voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the strength it took to be vulnerable. She told him she never planned to stop loving him, only that life didn't wait. That she had written letters he never got, begged for responses that never came, and watched years go by with nothing but fear and silence. she told him she broke. The day she realized he might not return, and even if he did, he might not come back as the man he used to be. Her confession wasn't about betrayal. It was about survival, about clinging to something human when everything else was lost. "I wasn't unfaithful to your memory," she whispered. "I just needed something real when the world felt like it was ending." Daniel felt something inside him fracture. Not in rage, but in recognition. Maybe he hadn't been the only one at war. Maybe he was never the only one bleeding silently. And maybe that changed everything. Daniel stayed silent not because he had nothing to say, but because every word he thought of felt too small. He wasn't ready for this kind of truth. He had trained to disarm bombs, not heartbreaks. He had faced insurgents and sniper fire, but nothing in his life prepared him for the moment when love didn't look like loyalty, and pain didn't come from bullets. His hands trembled as he reached for his cup, the heat grounding him while his heart drifted somewhere between memory and loss. Across the table, Laura waited, not for forgiveness, but for understanding. And maybe even that was too much to ask. Her voice returned, softer this time. "I didn't replace you. I just needed to keep breathing." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to hate her. It would have been easier, but he knew now that hate was a luxury you only got when things were black and white, and nothing about this was. He finally looked at her, really looked, not the woman who hurt him, not the stranger he thought he'd return to, but the person who had lived a different kind of war, a war of absence, of silence, of waiting. And maybe, just maybe, she lost more than he did. The silence stretched between them again, but this time it felt less final, like a breath being held before something more honest could begin. Daniel didn't say, "I forgive you." He didn't say, "I understand." He simply asked, "Was he here last night?" She nodded. No apology, no shame, just truth. Daniel stood up slowly, not to leave, not yet, but to feel his own weight again, on legs that hadn't stood for much since coming home. And in that moment he realized, maybe healing starts when the blame no longer matters. Daniel didn't leave the house that night. He walked to the guest room instead, sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, and stared at the wall like it might answer questions he was too tired to ask. His body was exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. Every breath felt like it carried the weight of two wars, the one he had just returned from, and the one unfolding now inside his own home. He had imagined this homecoming 1,000 times. None of those versions included another man's scent on the pillows, or a confession delivered so calmly it made him question everything. Yet here he was, not screaming, not breaking things, just unraveling quietly. At some point in the night, Daniel found himself digging through a box he'd left behind before deploying. Inside it were photos, letters, and a small leather notebook Laura had once given him. It was empty. He had never written a word in it. But now, hands trembling, he opened it and began to write. Not about Laura, not about the man, about himself, about the quiet guilt he carried for never calling enough, for pretending he was fine in every letter, for wanting to survive more than he wanted to return. The truth hit him like cold water. Maybe he had been absent long before he ever left. Maybe she hadn't betrayed love. Maybe she had just stopped waiting for a version of him that never came back. With every line he wrote, his anger dissolved just a little. Not because he excused what she had done, but because he could finally see her and himself without the armor. That night, Daniel didn't heal, but he began something quieter, something slower, the kind of beginning that doesn't feel like hope, until it does. By morning, Laura knocked gently on the guest room door. No makeup, no defenses, just a woman whose eyes looked like they hadn't rested either. She didn't ask to come in, just stood there like she had something fragile to say but didn't know how. Daniel looked up from the notebook still open on his lap. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice hoarse but steady. Laura stepped inside and sat across from him, careful not to come too close. "Because I didn't know how to explain surviving," she whispered. "Every time I got a letter from you saying you were okay, I'd reread it 100 times just to believe it. But then days would pass, then weeks, and I realized I was disappearing too." She admitted that she had met someone through a support group, that it hadn't been a betrayal so much as a search for air. He had helped her sleep, talk, exist. "I never stopped loving you," she said, "but I stopped knowing who I was waiting for." The words didn't soften the pain, but they rearranged it. Daniel didn't see a wife who cheated. He saw a woman who grieved him while he was still breathing. A woman who was abandoned in a way neither of them could name. "Did you love him?" Daniel asked. She hesitated. "I think I loved what he reminded me of. Safety, presence, things I thought I lost with you." And then silence. A heavy, respectful silence. Not forgiveness, not resolution. Just the truth laid bare between them like a wound neither wanted to keep pretending wasn't there. For the first time, Daniel felt something shift. Not backwards, not forward, but inward. Towards something that looked less like loss, and more like understanding. That afternoon, Daniel stood by the window, watching the leaves stir outside like fragments of a life that had changed while he wasn't looking. Laura passed by silently, holding a blanket, setting it down beside him like an unspoken offering. "I'm leaving," he said. "Not because I hate you, but because I need to meet myself again. And I don't know who I am in this version of our story." She nodded, tears welling, not in resistance, but recognition. There was no final argument, no closure wrapped in tidy words. Just two people who had once loved each other deeply, now learning to mourn something that still had a heartbeat. Before leaving, Daniel walked back into the bedroom and left a photograph on her pillow, the same one she'd once sent to him during the war. On the back, he wrote, "Thank you for keeping me alive, even when I didn't know how to stay." Outside, as he stepped into the taxi, Laura didn't run after him. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed in quiet grief, watching the man she had waited for, and lost in a different way. And Daniel? He didn't look back. Not out of anger, but because some goodbyes deserve to be walked through, not erased. He wasn't leaving a marriage. He was leaving the illusion that everything would be waiting just as he left it. Sometimes, the battle isn't out there in the world. It's what happens when you return and realize that the war followed you home, quietly, in the spaces no one prepared you to face. And maybe that's the hardest part. Not surviving, but understanding. And you? If someone you loved changed while you were gone, would you stay? Or would you walk away?